The boardroom was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall but hangs. Like a fog you can't see through but feel settle in your chest. I sat at the far end of the glass table. My back straight, hands folded neatly, every inch of me composed. But inside, my heart thudded with every tick of the vintage wall clock. Tick, tick, tick. The seconds dragged like hours. I wasn't nervous. I was anticipating. For nearly a year, I had poured every ounce of my being into saving Stratix Global from a nosedive that everyone else had deemed inevitable. My reward? Well, that's what I was about to find out. Next to me sat Tyler Shaw, hunched in his chair with the same indifference he wore to Monday meetings. His sleeves were rolled. He was spinning a pen through his fingers, half smirking at nothing. A man who'd never once stayed past 5. Who once asked if a database needed Wi-Fi to work. Yet somehow, here he was, invited to the same special recognition meeting. Red flag number 1. Mr. Everett Daniels, the CEO, walked in with a practiced smile. It didn't reach his eyes. It rarely did. Claire, he said, nodding at me. Tyler. He paused like he was about to deliver a speech. We wanted to take a moment to recognize the incredible strides our company has made this quarter. We've seen a 300% increase in profits, thanks to some transformational upgrades. Transformational, that was one word for it. I'd built a full-stack AI logistics engine from scratch. We were using sticky notes and spreadsheets when I joined. Now we had predictive routing and autonomous load balancing. I hadn't just upgraded our systems, I'd rebuilt them in my image. And Claire, he added, your work on the Smart Route platform was extraordinary. It's become the backbone of everything we do. I nodded once, not smugly, just acknowledgement. I knew what I'd done. The nights, the bugs, the crashes I personally revived. Every 3 a.m. server alert I triaged without support. I didn't need applause, I needed fairness. Then Daniels turned to Tyler. And Tyler, your leadership potential is really beginning to shine. Wait, what? I blinked. I must have misheard. Leadership potential? Tyler, the man who once asked if an API was a kind of drink, was being recognized for, what? Morale? Mr. Daniels smiled, which is why, starting next week, Tyler will be stepping into the new Director of AI Operations role. For a second, the words just bounced off me like raindrops on armor. They couldn't stick, couldn't possibly mean what they sounded like. My department? I asked calmly, though my voice carried an edge I didn't bother hiding. You're giving my department to Tyler? Daniels raised a hand like he'd been waiting for that. Claire, your talent is not in question. But leadership, it's about presence. About representing us to investors. About perception. Tyler's smug little grin widened. You're brilliant, Claire, Daniels continued, but you're also intense. Focused. Investors want warmth, relatability. Tyler brings that energy. I stared. My jaw didn't drop. My composure didn't falter. But inside, I was burning. And then came the kicker. Daniels reached into his blazer and pulled out a crumpled $50 bill. He dropped it on the table like a waiter tipping a valet. For your effort, he said. I stared at that bill. $50. I'd just built the tech that saved a company from collapse, and I was getting tipped like a barista. Thank you, I said softly, and slipped the bill into my coat pocket. He blinked. You're not upset? No, I said with a small smile. I'm just excusing myself. And with that, I stood, heels clicking on polished floors, and walked out of the room that had no more space for me. No slam, no scene, just silence, because I knew what they didn't. I never needed their applause. I stayed quiet not out of weakness, but calculation. I wasn't done. The next morning, I arrived at Stratix at 7:45 a.m. sharp. I'd never shown up that early before. But I needed to see it all one last time. The halls I'd rebuilt, the systems I'd coded, the team I'd trained. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall. Calm, collected, tired, but sharp. The third floor, my floor, opened. And there it was. My name, hastily written in marker, on 3 cardboard boxes shoved against the wall. And in my chair, with his sneakers kicked up on my desk like he owned the place, sat Tyler Shaw. Oh hey, he said with that dopey grin. Didn't think you'd come in. I didn't answer, just walked in like I still belonged there. He shifted slightly, uneasy. Good, I'm just here for my things. I said. Right, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Daniels said you'd be helping with legacy system support. Should be fun, lots of backend cleanup. Backend cleanup. I wanted to laugh, I'd just written the most advanced AI platform Stratix had ever seen. And now I was being reassigned to fix printers? Sounds thrilling, I replied dryly. He didn't catch the sarcasm. He never did. I walked to the back of the building, the IT dungeon. Basically, one desk, one flickering monitor, one broken chair. I sat down, took it all in. No anger, not yet, just analysis. Because here's what they didn't know. The version of Smart Route they had. That wasn't the final build. The actual version, the real thing. With deep learning and adaptive predictive systems, lived on a private, encrypted server. Mine. They were running on scaffolding. I held the power. I just hadn't shown it yet. And I wasn't going to fight for a desk in a company that saw me as replaceable. No, I was going to build something bigger. That afternoon, I sent 3 messages. One to Natalie Reyes, our ex-chief marketing officer who had doubled conversion rates before being laid off during budget cuts. One to Marcus Flynn, our former head of infrastructure who'd quit after Tyler bungled a migration and nearly nuked our analytics database. And one to Zoe Kim, the only engineer who'd ever matched my technical depth. Short, deliberate messages. No one replied immediately, but I knew they would. Because like me, they weren't disposable, they were just misplaced in a story that wasn't written for people like us. But we were about to write our own. The first reply came just past midnight. Natalie. Her message was short but powerful. Been waiting for this call. Where and when? 10 minutes later, Marcus replied. If this is about what I think it is, I'm in. And finally, Zoe. Still got that prototype? Still think it's the future? Let's build. That was it. No pleasantries. No hesitation. Just purpose. We met 3 days later, Sunday afternoon. Corner booth. No logos. No laptops. Just the 4 of us. Dressed down. Sipping overpriced coffee in a quiet industrial cafe in Midtown. You wouldn't have guessed we were plotting a revolution. But that's exactly what we were doing. Natalie stirred her tea like she was dissecting a boardroom. They really gave him your title? I nodded. And a $50 bill. I added flatly. Marcus actually choked on his drink. They tipped you? They tried, I said, sliding the crumpled bill across the table. Zoe smirked. I'd frame it. Not yet, I said. First, I want to make them remember why they ever needed me. That's when I pulled out the folder. Inside was everything I'd been working on, silently, methodically, for the past 6 months. Not just the code for SmartRoute's next-gen engine, but an entirely new platform, modular, predictive, built for adaptability across industries. Not just logistics. A neural core that improved itself with every data loop. Energy-efficient routing suggestions, carbon tracking, procurement optimization, and a UI so intuitive, it could be used by a 60-year-old warehouse manager with zero tech background. Zoe's eyes lit up as she scanned the diagrams. Claire, this isn't an upgrade, this is another species. I started designing it the week I realized Stratix would try to own me. You mean, own your work, Natalie corrected. No, I said, eyes fixed on the blueprint. I mean me. Marcus glanced at me. Is this legal? I nodded. The foundation was built on my own time. I never signed over the full intellectual property, only implementation rights for the stripped-down corporate version. The engine in this doc? It never touched their servers. Zoe grinned. Then let's give the world what Stratix never deserved. We didn't have funding. We didn't have a sleek glass-walled office. But we had something better, clarity. And we weren't trying to compete with Stratix. We were going to replace them. Our first home was my apartment living room. My couch became our war room. My coffee table, our central console. We worked off of Marcus's old servers and a Frankenstein setup Zoe built from spare parts in her garage. It was chaotic, intense, and electric. We ordered Thai food by the box and slept in shifts. We coded like students before finals, fueled by caffeine, rage, and the quiet joy of knowing exactly what we were building. And within 5 weeks, Volantra was born. That was our name. Short, sharp, global. Sounded like movement, like velocity and elegance all at once. Natalie came up with it. She said it felt inevitable. I liked that. Our tagline? Smarter movement, seamless future. We launched quietly. No social campaigns, no ads. Just one email, sent to 5 companies I personally onboarded during Stratix's AI shift. Logistics networks, national freight lines, and a high-volume food supplier with razor-thin margins. The first to reply wasn't who I expected. It was Evergreen Food Logistics. They were one of Stratix's top 3 clients. Their CTO, A straight-talking woman named Darla who once told me I was the only engineer she'd ever met who could explain AI without sounding like a magician. She responded with one sentence. Claire, I heard what they did. Let's talk. Meanwhile, back at Stratix, things were unraveling. Tyler, in all his brilliance, decided to simplify backend scripts to improve load times. What he actually did was cripple their entire reroute engine. Shipping delays spiked. Inventory data became unreliable. Their routing lag went from 0.2 seconds to nearly 12. It doesn't sound like much until you realize that 12 seconds multiplied by 200.000 shipments is the difference between smooth flow and gridlock. By the time Stratix patched the damage, Evergreen had already scheduled a demo with Volantra. We didn't overpromise. We just showed them what we built. Natalie walked them through real-time dashboards. Zoe demonstrated the adaptive engine on a live dataset. And Marcus let them push it to stress test levels. It held, smooth as silk. At the end of the call, Darla just said, "You built the system they sold us on. Except now it works." Within 2 weeks, Stratix lost 3 major clients. All came to Volantra. The fourth, undecided, was monitoring the landscape, which meant waiting to see if the rumors were true. So we gave them proof. Natalie and I worked with a filmmaker friend to craft a 90-second product reel. Clean, punchy, not flashy, just effective. Real results, real savings, real impact. When we launched the video, we didn't even tag Stratix. Didn't have to. The industry tagged them for us. Within 48 hours, LinkedIn lit up. Forums started asking who Volantra was. One blog called us the ghost in Stratix's machine. I liked that, too. At Stratix, panic spread like wildfire. I heard from someone in HR, an old friend, that Tyler called a leadership sink, and spent most of it blaming legacy code for recent issues. You know, my legacy. But people weren't buying it anymore. The same developers who used to nod along in meetings were now whispering behind his back about how it was me who stayed late. Me who fixed the live bugs. Me who trained them. Truth, it turns out, has a longer shelf life than charisma. Then came the email that changed everything. Subject, strategic partnership discussion. From Everett Daniels. To Claire Morgan. He wanted to meet at Nova Systems HQ. Our HQ. My company. I leaned back and smiled. This wasn't a conversation. This was an ending. Friday arrived faster than I expected. I didn't feel nervous. Not even a little. I felt ready. I wore black that day. Not because I wanted to make a statement, but because black is precise. Clean. Unforgiving. My tailored blazer had no labels. My shoes. No sparkle. The most powerful thing in the room doesn't need to shout. When I entered the boardroom at Nova Systems, our head of operations was already waiting. Jason gave me a short nod and slid a cold bottle of water across the table. You sure you don't want me in the room? I shook my head. No, this one's mine. At 10:01 a.m., they walked in, Everett Daniels, CEO of Stratix Global, and Tyler Shaw, the golden boy who'd been given my department, my role, my system. Both looked older than I remembered. Daniels was paler, his tie too tight. Tyler looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. The swagger was gone. His walk was tentative, like a kid who knows the principal just called his parents. Thank you for meeting with us, Daniels began, as if this were just another vendor pitch. I sat quietly, letting them fumble in the silence. We believe there's a unique opportunity here, he continued, to realign, perhaps discuss licensing Volantra's core systems under a strategic alliance framework. Tyler leaned forward, trying too hard. Claire, look, we know you're doing amazing work. Everyone's talking about it, but Stratix still has scale, brand presence, infrastructure. We think if we... I raised a hand. He stopped. You're hemorrhaging clients, I said. He blinked. You've burned investor trust. You've released patch after patch without understanding the core logic of the system I built. And you've demoted, displaced, and discarded every person who gave you your miracle quarter. Daniels cleared his throat, tried to interject. I didn't let him. You're only here because you assumed I'd disappear. That I'd accept your scraps and stay quiet. You underestimated me once, Everett. You don't get to do it again. The room fell into dead silence. And then I stood. I didn't come here to rejoin Stratix, I said evenly. I came to end this. I pulled out the folder from my satchel and slid it across the table. This is a formal acquisition offer. Nova Systems is prepared to purchase all remaining Stratix Global Tech assets, patents, and software licenses. We'll absorb your IP. You walk away with a severance package and a signed non-compete. Tyler stared like I had slapped him. Daniels finally broke. You can't do this. I tilted my head. You don't own the future anymore. You licensed the past. He went quiet again. Then something surprising happened. Tyler whispered, but, you built that tech under our roof. I met his eyes. The version you're using? Yes. The one I'm building now? I started it before you even knew what a neural map was. Check the logs. I covered every legal inch. Daniels looked at the papers in front of him. And I saw it, the moment it clicked. The moment he realized he had no cards left. No press release. No headlines. I added, this deal stays quiet. You walk away. We move forward. Or, you can wait another month and bleed out. Your call. They left the room without another word. I sat in the stillness for a long moment. Jason peeked in a minute later. How'd it go? They folded. He whistled. Did you raise your voice? I smiled. Didn't need to. Because power, real power, doesn't need volume. It waits. Then when the time is right, it takes everything back. The acquisition closed within the week. No media circus. Just a dry financial filing and a line in an internal memo that read. Effective immediately. All Stratix global technology licenses and digital assets will transfer to Nova Systems under private ownership. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt clear. What started as a mission to prove them wrong had become something much deeper. Proving myself right. And then something I never expected happened. He showed up. Not Everett. Not Tyler. My father. I hadn't seen him in over 2 years. He used to be an engineer himself, a systems guy. Old school. Believed in servers you could touch and code that printed in lines. Not layers. He always taught me how to troubleshoot. How to think in logic trees. But he never once believed I could lead. To him, I was the girl who should focus on the work and let the men handle the room. And yet, there he was, waiting quietly outside Nova HQ. He wore the same gray suit. Still pressed, still formal, but this time, his posture had softened. Hi, Claire, he said, almost unsure. Dad, I heard about Stratix. And Nova. Everything. I nodded. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. Sorry for not believing in you. For thinking success had to sound a certain way. Look a certain way. I didn't say anything at first. Then, quietly, thank you. He looked surprised, like he thought I'd yell, cry, curse him out. But I was done chasing apologies. I just needed him to see me. And in that moment, he did. The next day, Nova Systems hosted our first global summit. We were no longer a startup. We were the standard. Hundreds of industry leaders filled the grand hall. I stood at the podium. The stage lights warm on my face. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to win anyone's approval. I was simply present. At the end of my keynote, I paused before the final slide. There's something I want to leave you with, I said. A few hundred faces leaned forward. This story didn't start with strategy. It started with a $50 bill and a demotion. With being overlooked, misjudged, underestimated. But here's the thing. That wasn't the end. That wasn't even the climax. That was just the beginning of a legacy built not on revenge, but on resolve. And the room rose to their feet. 6 months after the acquisition, we were everywhere. Volantra had gone from whispered startup to gold standard. If you worked in supply chain, logistics, or AI-driven inventory, we were the name in the room. Not the loudest, just the one people trusted. We didn't chase headlines, but they came anyway. The woman who rebuilt the future for $50. Claire Morgan. The engineer who outperformed a Fortune 500. Volantra's quiet empire. Investors came knocking, but we weren't desperate anymore. We didn't need their money. Now we chose our partners. And yet, something shifted. I didn't notice it right away. It started small, the little details. Jason stopped arguing with me in meetings. Natalie began saying, whatever you think is best. A little too often. Zoe? She still challenged the code, always, but even she had begun stepping back when I spoke. I should have been flattered. I wasn't. Because I knew what that deference meant. They didn't see me as a teammate anymore. They saw me as untouchable. And that's dangerous. That's how empires collapse, from within. One night, long after everyone had gone home, I stood by the massive glass window of our downtown office, looking out over the city. We had everything I once dreamed of. Clients, stability, respect. But I kept thinking about the hallway I once walked through at Stratix, after being demoted, as people looked away. Too afraid to speak. I never wanted to build a place where people walked on eggshells. And yet, slowly, unconsciously, maybe I was. That realization hit hardest during a Monday all-hands meeting. Zoe presented a new predictive module she'd written, one that learned from exceptions in routing instead of average patterns. It was brilliant. Messy, but brilliant. I asked 3 hard questions. She answered calmly. Then she hesitated. We can remove it from the next build if you're not comfortable. I blinked. Zoe, do you believe it works? She nodded. Yes, I wouldn't bring it if I didn't. Then why are you offering to pull it? She glanced at Natalie, then Jason, then back at me. Because it's your name on the homepage. That hit harder than I expected. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the girl I used to be, the one walking out of Stratix with boxes in her arms and $50 in her pocket. That girl wasn't trying to be a CEO. She just wanted to build something honest. Something real. And I realized that somewhere between reclaiming my power and expanding our reach, I'd become something else. Intimidating. The next morning, I walked into the team meeting 5 minutes late on purpose. I let them settle, let them begin without me. Then I took my usual seat, not at the head of the table, but right beside Zoe. She looked surprised. I leaned forward. We're changing the way we lead, I said. Jason raised an eyebrow. I built Volantra because I didn't want to be silenced. Because I knew what it felt like to be dismissed, spoken over, minimized. I paused. And now, I see that silence again, but this time, it's coming from the people I trust most. And that means I did something wrong. No one said a word. Not at first. So I kept going. I'm not interested in building another Stratix. I'm not here to be a queen. I'm here to be a partner. A builder. An architect. Zoe was the first to nod. Then Natalie. Then Jason smiled. Thank God, he said. We've been waiting for that Claire to come back. That moment reset something. We didn't become a perfect company overnight, that's not how this works. But we became better, more honest. We argued again, in the good way. We disagreed, challenged, improved, and we kept growing. 1 month later, we were invited to speak at the World Supply Chain Innovation Conference in Geneva. 3 years ago, I was fixing bugs in a back closet. Now I was opening the keynote on a global stage. I walked on stage wearing a soft gray blazer, no black this time. No armor. Just me. Real. Open. Ready. 3 years ago, I said to the crowd. I was told that perception mattered more than capability. That charisma mattered more than contribution. That people like me, engineers who think too hard, care too much, didn't belong in leadership. I paused. But today, I'm here because someone gave me $50 to step aside. And I took it, not as an insult, but as capital. I built something with it. Not a company. Not a product. A movement. And they stood up for me, thousands of them. Not because I was loud. Not because I demanded it. But because I had built something they could believe in. Something that spoke for itself. It started with a billboard. Just one. Minimal. White background. Black letters. No company logo. No call to action. Just a single line of text on the corner of 6th and Franklin. Smarter doesn't mean smaller. At first, I laughed. Seemed harmless, even lazy. But Zoe didn't laugh. She stared at the photo Jason had snapped and narrowed her eyes. That's targeted, she said. It's a shot at us. A week later, a new company entered the scene. Nixora AI, backed by Vanguard Capital, the same private equity group that once tried to buy out Stratix. They hadn't just entered the market. They had declared war. At first, I wasn't worried. We had the clients. We had the tech. We had the trust. But then the talent drain started. People began receiving anonymous messages. Big offers. Bigger stock options. A junior developer from our Toronto team was the first to go. Then a UX designer. Then someone from finance. None of the departures hurt individually. But they were chipping away at the edges. Zoe and Jason stayed calm. Natalie didn't. We need to respond, she said one morning, pacing my office. They're building fast. They're copying our language, our layouts, even our philosophy. They're buying speed, I said, but speed without depth is just chaos. They don't care. Investors don't care. Perception is reality, remember? She was right. And I hated that she was right. The breaking point came when Elijah Tran announced he was leaving. Elijah wasn't just another engineer. He was one of the originals, someone I'd trained. Someone who'd helped sketch the early design for Volantra's adaptive routing kernel. When he walked into my office with a resignation letter, I already knew. Nixora had gotten to him. I'm sorry, he said, they're offering double the salary. And a lead role. I just can't say no. I nodded, tried to keep my face still. You're not betraying us, I said gently. You're choosing your path. But inside, I felt it. Not anger, not fear, doubt. If even the people who helped build the foundation were leaving, what did that mean about the structure I was letting? That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office. The city outside humming through the glass. The room felt big, too big. I walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and wrote one word. Why? Why did we start this? Not to be rich, not to go public, not even to win. We started Volantra because we were sick of being told we weren't enough. Because we were tired of charisma winning over competence. Because we believed in better, not just in code, but in culture. I stepped back, staring at the board. And then, I started writing again. A new plan. Not for profit. For people. The next morning, I gathered the full team. No slides. No data decks. Just honesty. I know what's happening, I said. You're seeing offers. Getting DMs. Some of you are wondering if Volantra can survive when there's a billion-dollar machine trying to outspend us. Silence. But let me ask you this. Did you join this company because of a salary? Or because of a mission? A few glances exchanged across the table. I can't match Nexora's money. Not today, but I can promise you something they'll never offer, a voice. Ownership. A culture where you matter not just for what you build, but for who you are while you're building it. Zoe stepped forward. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Let them copy our slides. They can't copy our soul. It wasn't dramatic. There were no applause breaks. No standing ovation. But something shifted. People relaxed, smiled, spoke up again. And that night, Elijah messaged me. I turned them down. If Volantra still has room, I'd like to stay. I forgot why I joined. But today reminded me. I didn't cry, but I did let out the longest breath I'd held in months. Over the next 2 weeks, we rebuilt what had started to fray. We tightened up onboarding. We opened up internal mentorship tracks. We made space for the people who had once felt unseen, including our junior staff who'd been afraid to speak in team reviews. And we introduced something radical in our industry. Open salary transparency. If we couldn't outpay Nexora, we'd out-honor them. We showed every team member how their compensation was calculated, how growth was measured, and how their work tied to company success. Not a single person left after that. Because now, they weren't guessing. They knew where they stood. Nexora didn't collapse, not right away, but cracks began to show. Their smarter AI broke during a high-stakes routing deployment with a national distributor. Orders were misrouted, deadlines missed, clients furious. Volantra was called in to audit the mess, quietly. Behind closed doors. We fixed it in 3 hours. The client? They came back to us the next day with a 3-year renewal offer. That's when it hit me. We weren't just surviving. We were earning loyalty. Not through pressure or panic, but through patience. Through people. The email subject line was simple. Series C opportunity, Tier 1 investment interest. But it might as well have said, are you ready to become a billionaire? The sender? Ryder Thorne, managing director at Equinox Partners. A high-stakes venture capital firm known for flipping unicorns into empires. He wanted to talk about taking Volantra public. The valuation? North of $1.2 billion. I read the message 3 times before forwarding it to Natalie, Zoe, and Jason. Within the hour, we were sitting around the small conference table we still jokingly called the War Room, even though we could now afford 20 of them. Jason looked excited. Natalie looked cautious. Zoe looked unreadable. I mean, Jason began. This is it, right? The big leagues. The validation. The cap table. The Wall Street Journal cover. Claire, this could make all of us. He stopped himself. Rich. I finished for him. We all laughed. A little too loudly. Because it was tempting. More than tempting. It was seductive. The next day, I met Ryder for coffee. He was exactly what I expected. Polished. Charming. Razor sharp. He ordered a flat white without looking at the menu. I've followed Volantra since your demo video. He said, your retention rates are unheard of. Your client churn is non-existent. But what I really love, he leaned in, is you. The story, the grit, the $50 insult that turned into a revolution. I didn't flinch. He smiled. Let us help you scale. Global distribution, AI accelerators, IPO within 24 months. We'll position you to lead not just logistics, but enterprise automation globally. It was all very flattering. And very, very dangerous. I didn't say yes. Not then. But I didn't say no either. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again. Not because I was afraid of the decision, but because I knew it wasn't mine alone anymore. Volantra didn't belong to just me. It belonged to every person who stayed when they could have left. To every engineer who chose belief over fear. To every client who trusted us before we had glossy brochures. And maybe, to the woman I used to be, walking out of Stratix with cardboard boxes and a folded $50 bill in her pocket. The next morning, I called a full leadership meeting. I told them everything. The offer, the valuation, the timeline, the opportunity. Then I told them something else. If we do this, I said, we don't just gain capital. We gain shareholders, analysts, quarterly earnings pressure, PR machines, exit clauses, silence. Then Zoe spoke. We could expand, reach markets we can't touch now. Give our team global leverage. True, Natalie said, but at what cost? We've seen this story before. We go public, we start hiring fast, we dilute the culture. Next thing you know, we have a board making calls based on optics, not mission. Jason looked at me. What do you want, Claire? I hesitated. And for once, I answered from instinct, not strategy. I want us to keep choosing people over perception. Mission over momentum. And I want to grow, but not if it means turning into the thing we once walked away from. We spent the next 3 weeks evaluating every path. One of our advisors said, you can't stay boutique forever. Another said, you can't lead if you don't evolve. But deep down, I knew something the bankers never did. Power isn't scale, it's sovereignty. And I wasn't ready to give that up. In the end, we declined Equinox. Publicly, we said the timing wasn't right. Privately, we said, not like this. Instead, we created our own path, a dual growth track. We raised a modest round from values-aligned partners. We opened regional hubs in 3 cities, each led by former clients who had become believers. And most importantly, we introduced employee equity for every full-time worker, from engineers to IT to admin. Because if we were going to build a legacy, it wouldn't be one woman's name in lights. It would be a village. The press called it the anti-IPO. One op-ed read, Claire Morgan walks away from $1.2 billion and builds the company Silicon Valley said was impossible. But I didn't care about headlines anymore. I cared about our people, our pace, our promise, and most of all, our freedom. It's been 7 years since we founded Volantra. 5 years since we declined the billion-dollar IPO. And just over 1 year since I stepped down as CEO. Not because I was tired, but because it was time. Time to pass the torch. Not just to someone capable, but to someone different. Someone younger. Someone who didn't have to carry the same scars I once did. Her name is Tessa Ng. And she is everything I ever hoped a next-gen leader would be. Brilliant. Bold. And brave in a way I never got to be when I started. I'm not gone. Just beside her now. I'm the voice she calls at 10 p.m. when a system crash feels like the end of the world. The one who says, sleep on it, you'll fix it faster tomorrow. Sometimes, growth means getting out of the way. I moved to a small town outside Seattle. There's a lake, a trail, a dog I named Loop because he always comes back to the same stick. I read a lot now. Mentor at a local girls in STEM group. Speak at 1 or 2 conferences a year. But mostly, I live quietly. And honestly, I've never been more at peace. But then, one morning in late fall, I received a letter. Not an email, not a LinkedIn ping. A handwritten envelope. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. My stomach tightened. I opened it slowly. Inside were just 2 things. A folded copy of a press release. And a short note. In blue ink. You were right. I was wrong. We all were. And I never said thank you. I should have. So here it is. Thank you. E.D. Everett Daniels. The man who once gave me $50 and a backhanded compliment after I saved his company. The press release was from Stratix Global. Now just a small software services firm operating under a new parent company. Apparently, they were pivoting to outsourced tech support for small logistics chains. No AI, no innovation, just legacy support. I stared at the letter for a long time. Not because I was angry, but because, strangely, I felt nothing. No vindication, no bitterness, just closure. That night, I sat by the fire with Loop curled up by my feet and thought about how much had changed, and how much hadn't. People still underestimate quiet thinkers. Charisma still beats competence in the wrong rooms. And there are still CEOs somewhere giving speeches they didn't write. About systems they didn't build. But there's also something else now. There's Volantra. There's Tessa. There's a new generation of engineers and leaders who believe you can be brilliant and kind, technical and visionary, focused and fiercely human. And maybe that's enough. A few weeks later, I gave a talk at a university where I used to be an adjunct. Afterward, a young woman, probably 22, waited until everyone else had left. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her ID badge. "Hi," she said, "my name is Lauren. I'm studying AI and systems design. And I just wanted to say, I read your story, the $50 story. It made me stay in school when I thought I didn't belong." I smiled. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. She hesitated, then blurted, "Do you think people like me can ever really lead?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked, "What makes you think you can't?" She shrugged. "I guess I'm not loud, or polished, or political." I laughed softly. Neither was I. Before she left, she asked if she could take a photo with me. I said yes. And as she walked away, I thought to myself, this is the legacy. Not the IPOs. Not the headlines. Not the buildings with your name in bronze. But the quiet seed you plant, in someone else, that tells them you belong. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to lead, even if your voice shakes. You're allowed to rewrite the rules they tried to hand you. And in the end, the truth is simple. They gave me $50. I gave myself the world. And I gave it back, better than I found it. Not out of revenge, but out of resolve.